Hello and welcome to Inside Live, the IT Experts Take. I'm Jason Rader and I will be your host today as we talk about where is tech debt hiding in your business. We've got some experts with us that are going to walk us through this conversation. We've got with us today John O'Shaughnessy, who is an infrastructure architect and senior consultant. Welcome, John.
Welcome. Thank you. Glad to be here.
And we've got Rachel Jenkins, who is a senior product manager with us here at Insight. Welcome, Rachel. Glad to have you for your first time.
Yes, thank you. Glad to be here. I'm excited.
I am too. So I think from what we like to do, and I think, tech debt is one of those things that we hear a lot today. Although I was in a meeting not very long ago where somebody in our group said tech debt and somebody on the other side of the table was like, that's a great term. And I was like, oh, wow. So just to make sure that we don't have folks out there that haven't heard the term before, who wants to take a stab at defining what we're talking about when we say tech debt today?
I'll take a stab at it and we can all jump in. But technical debt to me is older systems, older processes, older pieces of technology that are holding you back. Like personal debt, you can't go off and buy something new if you got a boatload of credit you're trying to pay down. And that's what tech debt is to me, but it's more on the business and technology side.
Fair.
Yeah, and I like that. I think my definition would kind of be the measure of the cost of reworking a solution caused by an easier or yet limited solution. So you can, if you think of tech debt, it's basically you're taking shortcuts. It might be an intentional shortcut or an unintentional shortcut, and there's various obviously technologies and things that you can that would be impacted, whether that's a development team is choosing to write speedy code to launch a product faster, or maybe it's something as simple as not keeping up with patching or updates or upgrades or hardware, right? Things like that. So you've kind of got that intentional or unintentional tech debt, which is basically the measure of a cost. It's your debt. I want to go buy more stuff.
Well, and you both, kind of made me think of something, because sometimes you can leverage debt in a very positive way. You can incur debt to get to something that you couldn't get to unless you did incur it. So I think, and you mentioned, Rachel, sometimes those quick fixes are a necessity to get to where we've got to go to address a certain need in the business or an opportunity in the market. So I think that's an interesting way to think about tech debt for our folks out there and for ourselves, because a lot of times when I've used this term, we kind of think about that creep up factor where we look around and we realize that, wow, everything's old and we're going to have to upgrade everything. But it's more than that. Sometimes it's incurred intentionally, and we know we're going to have to come back and fix that. Maybe like in acquisitions, I think a lot of tech debt is potentially incurred with that kind of thing.
Yeah, that's huge. And I see a lot of that as we look at customers trying to decide what they want to do with their environments. Do they want to be doing some migration, say, to Azure? It's looking at their whole environment, not just the racks of dusty old servers, but what are they doing with these servers? What are their applications to determine what is the best way to move forward? And again, kind of the age-old example is there's that system in the corner. It is literally collecting dust. And you say, what's it used for? And they say, I don't know. The last people who supported this retired 3 years ago, but don't touch it. Okay, it's important, but don't touch it. So that to me is bad tech debt. That is something that you need to at least stay on top of. Does it mean that you have to replace this with the fanciest thing in the world? No, but you at least need to understand what it is so that you can prioritize properly where you're going to put your energy.
You had me seriously laughing out loud, because everybody's got that story. Anybody who's been in this business for any amount of time knows there's that one server that we can't turn off because we don't know what it does. But the last time we turned it off, everything stopped working. And that is the bad tech debt for sure. Rachel, you have anything to add? Sorry if I cut you off.
No, that's good. It made me laugh because you're right. We all have a similar story that, that's happened. Another thing might be, another example of tech debt might also be more like resource driven, or kind of a gap in a skill set, or a gap in some type of training where you're getting a feature implemented. So maybe that's something as a good debt where you have all of this feature functionality, but you're not actually adopting it for whatever reason. So maybe that's kind of a version of or a type of good debt.
Yeah, and I think we talked about where tech debt is potentially hiding in an organization. We've been talking about kind of these obvious places, but I do like that, tech debt isn't just the sheer tech of things. It's the process and the operationalization of around that tech. And also in the market right now, I mean, we're finding a lot when we're dealing with AI and some of these newer technologies that folks are wanting to embrace in their business, that stuff's sitting out there ready to implement, but the things that they were counting on it implementing with are not in a state of where it's going to be able to be maximized, like a data estate in general. And I think that can creep up on you as well from a tech debt perspective. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one of the big risks, again, it's not that you need to fix everything all the time, all at once, but you need to have that list going in your head or in your organization of where the stuff is. So, for example, if you want to move forward with some Gen AI in some part of your world, are you ready to do that? And I think where people get caught is this idea of they spend all their time firefighting and they're not being planful about retiring their debt, retiring that most expensive debt back to the consumer model, so that maybe you do keep some of the debt. You don't replace everything all at once, but you make those choices and you get rid of the crazy credit card debt before you deal with your student loan debt.
And I know you're both interfacing with clients a lot about this particular topic. Who do we typically engage with at an organization? Whose responsibility, because I know just historically from an IT and an infrastructure perspective, I know that a lot of those folks take on this burden, but as we've already said, it's more than that. And that compartmentalization can kind of mess you up as far as getting a full vision of what the impacts of the organization. Who are you typically interfacing with? And is it always, should there be more folks that you're interfacing with?
I would say yes, we want to interface with more people because, like you said, we see this as silos. It's the infrastructure people, it's that cabinet of gear. That's one take on tech debt. But for example, if we're talking to IT management and they have perhaps been through a series of mergers, they're looking at a bunch of different systems going, where do I move forward? Do I need to take all of these systems forward? It may not be that they're all old and broken. It's just inefficient for that organization to have 4 customer management systems. Let's pick one. Let's make sense what works for the business. And so again, it starts at that business process. Let's define what our requirements are as a business for these systems to help us make those right choices to move forward. And so again, tech debt isn't necessarily the old broken system. It's choosing the best system to move forward.
Agree.
I would probably add also to that, Jason, you mentioned earlier about, strategy versus operations before we join. There could be some tech debt in just even some of the strategy and planning of, higher level or short-term problems versus, some longer projects. So some type of like leadership or, that's kind of overseeing and helping set the stage of what's to come. I would also even, I have talked to some folks in the finance, part of it, whether that's kind of on the cloud side, but that workload alignment and cost optimization. Do we have any kind of tech debt, to John's point, instead of having a dusty server in the corner, a dusty virtual server or cloud server. And so you have finance people, I think, looking at that as well. But of course, I think the majority of the people I talk to are going to be on the engineering side.
Sure. And I think prior to the AI conversation that we seem to be having a lot of, before that, it was cloud. Before that was, what's our journey to the cloud look like? And that's where a lot of people were evaluating, or they were up against a renewal or a large capital expenditure. That made this conversation. And again, I think that was kind of an operational aspect. It wasn't necessarily a strategy aspect until they were right up against it. That's not how strategy should work, right? That's more of an instant response than strategy. Are we still? I still think there's a load of folks that are still having that cloud conversation, and now there's even more options for them.
Absolutely, and again, I think part of what happens is these topics come up as roadblocks. People are saying, we're going to move these systems to the cloud. We're going to move to Azure because we think it's a good fit. That part's great. But then, like you said, they start looking at what are the underlying systems that attach to this? What do we need to communicate with? And that's where they start to find out, oh, here's something that's been on the floor for 28 years. Nobody knows what it does. Okay, now you have to stop with your big migration project to deal with these older things that need to be patched, need to be fixed, need to be replaced. And then all of a sudden you're slowing down your modernization efforts because, again, you haven't addressed these things in your environment for 20 years. So again, better to keep that running list in the corner of your mind, in the corner of your screen, so that you're not being caught unaware.
I'm going to make a bold statement, and you guys feel free to disagree with me here, but I would say that a lift and shift without any thought to it to the cloud is basically, you're not relieving yourself of any tech debt. You're just moving it. Is that, what would you guys say to that?
Well, you're moving it and you're perhaps making it even more expensive. Exactly. And this is the old story about, taking the time to be planful about what you're going to do in these migrations. Figure out what has to move. Otherwise, if you're going to move all your junk as well as your critical systems, well, now you're paying for all your junk and your critical systems. I think about, again, back to a personal type story. People box things up to move. They move their house. They move to a new house, and they unbox the important stuff. If 8 months go by and there are boxes that you have not unpacked, maybe that wasn't so important to move, because you hear the stories about people who move a completely unopened box a second and third time. Really, is that what you want to do with your business? Probably not.
We mentioned compartmentalization. I do think that that's probably, especially in a large organization, that's probably one of the biggest hurdles, I think, to overcoming tech debt in a profound way. How about that? Because I think people are really good at upgrading these small components, but they're not nailing it because it's not the full solution that they're upgrading. Do you see what I'm saying? Or is that fair to say? Or is that just my weird angle from where I sit?
No, I think it's kind of are you laser focused onto the one thing? And it's easy to get 6 or 10 people focusing on that one thing, when really maybe you need that wide shot and you need to figure out what are these other pieces. And so whether it's an organizational silo point of view, software versus hardware, or is it even within one small team, it's these 3 systems we need to upgrade because they're on, Windows 2000. You got to take that step back. That may be a problem, but it may not be the right level for you to be addressing this problem in a really cost-effective way that isn't just hiding one piece of tech debt and squeezing it out into another area, as opposed to truly dealing with it.
Rachel, you brought up a point a minute ago that I'd love to kind of talk about again. The skill set aspect of that. And you also talked about operations and strategy, which I love to talk about the difference between those, because I think that nuance gets lost maybe at a higher level. And we talked a little bit about this when we were in the green room, where folks will get an ingestion of technology, software, hardware, whatever that happens to be. They expect operations to implement that perfectly, 100% accurate, right, and with all the bells and whistles enabled at the front end. And then the expectations, I think, were that it was going to be that way, where operations gets it functional. And then there's a lot of additional capabilities that could be enabled that maybe they're just not interested because I got it functional. And I think that's where, from a managed services perspective, you can kind of transfer a lot of that struggle, if you will, to somebody who can handle that aspect for you. And then your folks who know your business can focus more on a strategic perspective. Was that kind of what's going on there?
Yeah, no, absolutely. That's a great point. Way to kind of to bring that home. But that's a great point. I mean, if you have engineers that are, designing and implementing and training and operating and managing and handling day to day and all of the issues that arise, then you're going to have typically some type of, features that don't get fully implemented, or, things that might cause an outage or issue or some type of degradation, right? Where, and maybe you make a short config, to fix something, but it doesn't actually ever get fixed. And so, yeah, those things kind of creep and crawl until they just grow and kind of compound. So absolutely, I think that's a great point. Another thing, you've brought up AI a couple times. I kind of think of tech debt can either inhibit innovation if you're moving to, say cloud or AI, or you're looking forward, you're forward thinking, you're not a laggard, as far as in technology, but it can inhibit innovation, or it can also support innovation. So as you let things kind of creep up, or, you have a good handle on them, then I think that, tech debt can be good in either one of those ways, or can be beneficial in either one of those ways.
I see a question from Matt. He says, you mentioned business strategy. Is knowing the overall business strategy in great detail necessary, or can you get by with an overview?
I love that question.
Yeah.
So I think it's hugely important to understand the business strategy so that stuff can filter down. But I think the question there about in great detail, not necessarily. It needs to be at the appropriate level. Yeah. So does every engineer need to understand the 6-month business plan? Not necessarily. But do they need to know what key systems, what their key responsibilities are that support the business? They should, because it will help everybody prioritize within their own area where the focuses should be.
Yeah, love it. I mean, I think that's one of the reasons you use consultants and other organizations to help you with those, is because you can give them some basics on what you're trying to do from your, the business outcomes you're looking for. And then they can kind of, put the cards on the table of the different options they have to work with. And then you can, to finish my point on Matt's question, then you can get down into the details if necessary. But, it's kind of like going to buy a car. Are you looking for a minivan? Or are you looking for a, convertible? That'll at least get us in the right part of the lot to start looking at the right cars. And then we get down to the nuances that are appropriate there. But I definitely think with just kind of a basic understanding, you can get that ball rolling pretty quick. Yeah. I always forget, sorry, producers in the background prodding me, that we did a survey question that we should talk about.
Oh, yeah.
And thanks so much. We had an overwhelming amount of response to this survey. So thank you guys who answer the surveys that are out there. The question was, when you think about tech debt, what's your main area of concern? And actually, it's interesting because we haven't touched on this topic yet.
Yeah.
Because 26% said hardware, which is kind of where we talked about the dusty server aspects. 26% said software, which we've gone a little bit into that. 39% said licensing, and then other was 8%. So licensing tech debt, from that perspective, what do you guys think about that?
It's a great angle. And I think over time, licensing in general has become more complicated, more expensive, and therefore it has risen to the top in many people's considerations. I mean, a number of years ago, you would not think about a technology choice based on licensing. And today, you don't get very far off the whiteboard before you bring licensing into the picture. And so I think it does make absolute sense that as you're looking at your tech debt, licensing may very well be near the top of the list, and that you start to make decisions based on the licensing costs that you see or things that may be changing. And so again, as someone who's been in this business a while, I think it's good to be reminded of that, to perhaps raise that up in the decision-making process about how to move forward.
And without, patting ourselves on the back, I think one of the things that I was most impressed with when I came to Insight was the number of partners that they had out there and their understanding of the licensing that it takes to kind of get that stuff sorted out, because there's an overwhelming amount of complexity based on how you sort that out, even from a single partner, but from multiple. If we're trying to put a solution together that's got as a service and has multiple, aspects of hardware, software, on a global scale, that's a lot of stuff to deal with. And again, a partner like Insight is critical to get that sorted out. But it's licensing it's funny that 39% of the folks out there said, man, and I guess what that would mean is they feel that they are not licensing appropriately based on either where they want to go or getting the most out of what they have licensed. I would say that's why they're answering the question that way. Is that fair to say, Rachel?
Yeah, I would agree. I think that it's evident that there's so many areas of tech debt because the majority that answer that is one that we didn't talk about. So there's just probably so many other areas that are, in the shadows. So yeah, I absolutely agree. And John, I agree that it's highly become complex and not to even talk about renewals of licensing and, all the changes there. So absolutely.
Yeah, I do think, as a person, a leader at a company that's global and has a lot of stuff going on, it's when you're kind of reactive to a lot of things, it's, you're still functioning, everything's going great. When you really get a handle on understanding how you can maximize capability, especially, as the CISO, from a security perspective, we had a lot of best in breed products that are around and those kinds of things. When we consolidated everything to Microsoft, we got E5, we leveraged those capabilities across the organization. I was very excited about the additional capabilities that we had. And, this isn't necessarily a commercial for Microsoft. This is my own opinion, but I do think it resonates with a lot of people. That was really one of the best strategic investments that we made. And once we considered all of the other operational aspects and licensing, it really worked out super well for us. That's your mileage may vary, but I think that's a very interesting thing to consider when we're talking about tech debt, is that enabled us to go from when I became CISO, we weren't doing that. And after I did, it really advanced the capabilities of our security program in a large degree. And that was, again, personal experience, but I think a lot of people probably are considering that if they're not doing that right now.
No, I think that's a great point. And it is an example of licensing is complex. And in a case like an enterprise with an E5, you can get access to a boatload of stuff, a boatload of services that you may not be aware of. And again, it gets back to having those individuals who can be super helpful in saying, this is part of what you get with this package. You should take advantage of it, all the way back to the training conversation about tech debt. And the other question about, best of breed is training. If you can get into a platform situation where more people can be trained across a broader area of things, in some levels, you're bringing down your cost of training to allow you to have those better skills throughout, which will in turn keep you from perhaps falling further behind in certain silos.
So you mentioned something earlier, and I didn't think it was time to talk about it, but you talked about managing tech debt. You talked about basically having kind of a strategic view. The title of this was, where is it hidden? Hiding, where's tech debt hiding kind of aspects. But assuming you're going to get on top of that, what's the best way to kind of manage that? I mean, because knowing that you have tech debt and addressing that with a plan on how you're going to move from here to there, that is managing it. I mean, and I will also say, you're always going to have tech debt, just like you're always going to have a bottleneck, right? You're always going to have that thing that is the slowest part of your system. Every time you buy something, you're basically committing to a certain amount of time that you're going to leverage it. I think of like giant ERP systems, and those things are like giant juggernauts of tech debt in most organizations, because a lot of other stuff is moving very rapidly, and those things don't move typically very rapidly. What are your thoughts on that? What's the best way to kind of overall manage this state? And Rachel, please, you chime in as well.
I mean, to start, I think it's keeping track. It is literally having that, whiteboard, list of paper, whatever, of what are our systems, where are they on their life cycle? One of the things that is more common these days, whether it's, again, your personal life with Netflix or at work, it's more the subscription model. Subscription model, say, for a managed service that we could provide, or a subscription model for software that you're buying. one of the benefits of that is then somebody else is taking part of the burden of keeping things up to date, which helps you in your business keep those things up to date. So I think that's an important avenue, is to take advantage of the positives of some of these subscription services to help you minimize your tech debt, to be aware in these different columns where you may be falling behind, where you need to push forward, which things need to be, dealt with immediately versus they can wait. And so it's having a handle on that.
See, we got another one from Matt up on the board here. Love the training aspect you're digging into, John. Is this something that should be trained on a recurring and regular basis, or do you think one-time training is enough at onboarding new hires, new program standing up, etc.?
Broad question. I think it would be great. They talk about primacy in terms of educational training. So if you teach somebody something when they come in the door, it is more likely they're going to stick with understanding that and remembering that. So I think it's key to bring those things up early. But in this crazy business we're in, where things are changing all the time, you can't just touch it once. You need to hit it again and again and again to keep it front of mind, or at least appropriately in place of all the other activities that you need to do. So that, again, a system, whether it's a process or technology, hardware, software, that is 3 years old is a whole lot easier for people to get their hands around to figure out, do we need to upgrade this, than something that truly is 15 years old. It's going to take a lot more time and effort to come back up to speed on that 15-year-old system, first to understand what it is, to then decide what to do with it, rather than something that may only be a couple of years old. So yes, I think you need to have both initial training and recurrent training on that.
Agreed.
Yeah.
And that brings me back again to something we touched earlier, Rachel, about, kind of that managed service aspect of, there's, from a security perspective, from a operations perspective, I can think of a lot of reasons why that's a better model for folks when we're trying to retain top talent, there's a lot of things that you have to be concerned about. Security obviously comes to mind for me, but just in general, outsourcing the operational aspects. So the strategic aspects of managing the tech debt, the other things that are going on are more for the organization. I mean, I think everybody should take a look at that. And please, and my folks who work for me understand that as well. That doesn't mean that we're going to do it, but if we can't do it as good as we could outsource it, we should, figure out where we've got the right investments, because, in a market like we have today, most organizations aren't going to go through this exercise because they want to go out of business. They're going to go through this exercise because they want to go big or go better, right?
Yeah.
So if that's the case, we've got to be able to figure out what the best way we can deliver world-class internal and external capabilities. And I think, most organizations aren't, from a security perspective, again, is what I always use. They're not secure. That's not what they're in the business of doing. We at Insight are, there's a different thing there, but most organizations aren't in business to be secure. They're secure because they want to be in business. And I think that when most other things, I don't think any organization is in business to have an infrastructure and IT organization. Those things support the business. And I do think that just the exercise of taking a look at where managed services can help your organization, some of these things come to mind, things you might not have even thought about, because as you entertain that from an external perspective, when a managed services organization can tell you, oh, here's what we'll deliver on a monthly basis, here's the dashboards, here's those things, right, that might not be something they were ever getting internally. And what do you think? Am I way off here, or am I close?
No, I think you're definitely close. I think there's several different ways that folks can overcome kind of that tech debt. But yeah, and it's all dependent on the team and your skill set and where those gaps are, right? You take that into account, and it's where do you get your most bang for the buck? Is it maybe we need some after hours support, or maybe we need we have some large scale implementation of a certain project or feature set, or maybe it's just to help us us with, support and operations for certain, technology. Maybe it's consulting or assessment services. Come in and see where our tech debt might be hiding. So there's all kinds of different areas. But yeah, I think that you're right on with, the different areas that we would, be able to provide that support and kind of that world class, whether that's through implementation or managed services and that proactive and visibility into different technologies, different layers.
Love it. We're kind of at time. So if we were going to give some words of advice, some words of encouragement to the folks that are out there that are, obviously we didn't solve the tech debt problem with this discussion. We might have just brought more to mind for some folks. I always ask kind of where do they start, or what's your advice? What's a gold nugget we could throw out there for the folks that are watching? I'll go to Rachel first and then we'll close with John.
Goodness. I would say hey, let's start with licensing. Licensing hardware, maybe software versions, kind of do an assessment, I would say, as far as what you have running, and where there might be some vulnerabilities. I think there's several areas, but probably do some type of audit or assessment of, hardware, software, and licensing would be a really good, and resources would be a great place to start. And if you can do that on your own, or if you need, some consulting services to help, get a deliverable, then that would be something we could help with.
Mr. O'Shaughnessy?
And again, I would follow along. It basically what you want to get to is a roadmap. And this roadmap should be something that everybody has and they review and they update it regularly. Tech debt just becomes another lane on that freeway that's on your roadmap. And we can absolutely help with helping discover your environment, discover what you've got, work with you to, again, understand your business requirements, and then help translate that into the things that might need to change in your environment to help you down that roadmap, to figure out what's important, what should be done first, what should be maybe done later, to keep that road smooth so you're not running into these really huge bumps in the road with tech debt.
Love it. Thank you, sir. I really had a good time talking about this. Thanks for your flexibility. I know we maybe went off script a little bit. You guys are awesome. I also want to thank our partner that helped sponsor this show, Microsoft. Thank you guys so much for that. We, really have a passion for what we do here at Insight, and it's really awesome to be able to talk to experts like this and be able to share that knowledge with you. We love the interaction. Thanks for the comments, and thanks for those who helped fill out the survey. If you have any topics you want to hear about or any comments, please forward those along to us. And if you want to know more about what we do here at Insight, visit us at solutions.insight.com, and make sure you check out our partners Microsoft website as well. Cheers to everyone. Thanks for joining us. Thanks guys.
Everybody.
Thank you.